Hello everyone, welcome to AntKast by Ant Group. First off, Happy New Year to everybody. I am your guest host, Theodora Lau. Today I'm joined by my co-host, Bradley Leimer, who is also the co-author of the book Beyond Good. He is a banking industry veteran, a fellow speaker and advisor, and the former head of innovation at Santander. Now, Bradley, I'm willing to bet the majority of our regular listeners, especially those who are in the United States or in Europe, are tuning in from their home office today. What do you think?
Well, I know we are. And a happy new year to all of those who get to be working from home. How have things been for everybody is the big question. How were the holidays and all the rest? Today we are talking about working remote and future work trends and a little bit of fintech. When we think about how work has been, it's been a very different reality of people working in the office the last 2 years versus the front line and those who are in different geographies. It has been an experience very unequal across regions and the type of work we do. So let's get into some of those work trends. Especially for those who have been fortunate to work remote for part of this time, like ourselves. What do you think in terms of how it's going to change things, Theo? Are we going to work from home forever? Is everybody else going to work from home? What's going on here?
I don't know. I mean, remote work is not something new. For as long as I've remembered, I've, had one way or another work remotely in different locations. You think about, back then, going back 20 something, almost 30 years, I've always traveled for my work since the very beginning. So, whether or not it's remote working in the hotel room, remote working in an airplane, working away from the home office at a client site. Majority of my career, I rarely work in an office surrounding. But then again, I understand that, it's not the same experience for most people. But for me, that's always been how I've worked. However, with that being said, I do think that we are at a, what should we call it? New old age of remote work. So let's talk about some stats. So for example, Gartner, recently they found out that 82% of company leaders that they have surveyed plan for remote work for at least part of the week, or nearly half are planning to allow employees to work from home full time. I think the difference of what we've seen the last 2 years or so compared to before, for those of us who were fortunate to be working everywhere and anywhere, is that now there are more people that are doing it. And the shift was overnight. It was quick. We needed to get something done. We needed to get things done in a safe manner when everyone was and has been and still are distributed in different geographical area. So from the sheer scale of things, that is different. But I would like to believe that we are stepping in yet another future where we should be, and hopefully we are, focusing more on not just on efficiency of getting work done, but also from more inclusion aspect of things. How do we get things done when people are in different geographical locations and most likely in different time zones? How do we create that camaraderie and the culture, if you will, that's, since we don't have a physical water cooler, shall we say, to just chat. The interesting part, though, is, as I remember listening to Solomon recently, and he's saying that why he is not a believer of letting people work from home in Goldman Sachs is because he said majority of his team are younger workers, people that just graduated college, people that are in the 20s, and people who still need to learn, shall we say, the art of trade. And so he felt that by forcing a lot of these younger workers away from the office and work from home takes the opportunity away from them to learn from others, to learn from those who've been in the business in Wall Street for a long time, and to learn how to work together as a team. So, I mean, I can see both sides. What do you think?
We've seen a dramatic, sort of increase in transparency around the work environment because we've had to communicate more. We've had to focus more on, a sort of sense of inclusiveness and diversity of our teams in a different way because now we're looking at things differently. We're leveraging technology that sort of forces that point. We've seen a reduction in carbon footprint because some industries and certain commutes have changed so dramatically. So there's an awful lot of shift, some of which has been positive. Now, one of the other things that's kind of interesting is that companies are paying much more attention to the safety and health of its employees, like it's never have been, before. A lot of that has been obviously COVID-related concerns and protocols, but what about mental health? What has changed about the way companies think about mental health and who they're hiring and how they evaluate? Yeah, there's a lot of positives, but there's some negatives too to remote work. What do you think about that? What's on your mind?
I don't know if I would necessarily say is negatives of remote work. More so is the negatives of the shift we're seeing. Two key challenges I do see though, and I know we have all experienced it one way or another, is the blurring of lines between our personal and professional lives, as well as the asynchronous aspects of distributed workforce that you just mentioned earlier. It's not by any means easy, of course, especially for those of us with children at home during a pandemic. So it is important to try to take breaks whenever possible. I found that intentionally creating time blocks for different tasks can be quite helpful sometimes, although I know it's not always possible. But for example, I would try to group my meetings into 2 to 3 days of the week and leaving at least one day of the week, typically Friday, that I can use to clean up my emails, right, and decompress and plan for the next week. Changing the scenery, I found, is also helpful. Sometimes I set my laptop up on the kitchen table, or sometimes I use the standing desk because, we can't always be sitting at the chair and at the desk for 8 hours of the day. I've also learned one trick recently to turn the camera off for some meetings, which according to some studies that actually help to make you more productive and less tired. So these are little tricks that I've picked up in the last 2 years. But I do think one thing, if anything else, this is the most important that I've learned, is that self-care is crucial. You cannot take care of others and be productive at work when you are depressed, stressed, or feeling anxious. So drawing boundaries, taking care of yourself and your family while embracing new ways of working and collaborating, it's important for us to continue this quote unquote new mode of working. Personally, I would love to see the future become more inclusive, where we can think about people who don't have those options. How do we create those options? And personally, I would like to hope and think that the future of work is about connectivity. How do we connect human souls and building human connections? And not so much so just looking at getting the current task done. But then again, we can only dream, and hopefully the future will be a little bit different.
Yeah, well, we dare to dream. And I agree with you. I think that the way that work is changing will have longer term benefits. I think more people getting into creating companies and creating a work-life balance that works better for them is going to be incredibly uplifting, not just to individuals and communities, but to free up this idea of what a business and what its purpose really is. According to consulting firm Korn Ferry, 74% of executives surveyed think employee turnover is going to get even worse in the coming year. So for those of you that are leading companies or part of managing the workforce, and you think about this past couple years, I don't think you're even prepared for what's coming next, because I think there will continue to be a disconnect between work, between business models, and between what is actually happening inside your workers' minds about what they want to do. So an awful lot of change is coming. Speaking of change, let's talk a little bit about fintech and banking, because for those of the listeners that haven't ever heard from us, that's a lot of what we do is we focus on financial services. So what's going on there?
Ooh, a lot of changes. I think if we were to sum up the past year, 2021, it's about funding, astronomical amount of funding go into the fintech industry, and a lot of changes that we see. We see companies, fintechs expanding from the silos into platforms that they're offering more, which is a welcoming trend, honestly. But I think for me, what I do look forward to though next year, apart from all of that we just talked about, is looking at how business models change. The one thing that has fascinated me for the last 2 years is around embedded finance. Now, embedded finance, not in like the Peloton model, which a lot of us have talked about, but embedded finance models that benefit those who are not currently well served by incumbent banks. So, for example, what we have witnessed in Asia and Africa, I think that was just the tip of the iceberg. I love the use cases around using AI and satellite imagery to improve crop yield, for example. Or another example that Arun likes to talk a lot about, fisheries, how they use technology to help improve productivity using data and help them for the entire supply chain and help de-risk the whole process. And what is really fascinating about all of this is, as much as we, some in the ecosystem, love to talk about the danger of AI and how it would completely take over humans, I love to look at using AI for good, using technology for good. How can we use technology to make things more efficient, to improve the well-being of those that are being ignored, right? The fishermen, the farmers, how can they use the technology that we have right now to not just be able to do their work much easier, more efficient, but also, for example, to get credit services through different models. And that's what fintech and that's what financial innovation should be about anyway, is how can you use that to help those who are underserved by incumbent banks. And there are no better use cases than embedded finance and helping them with, with the rural communities, especially when things are going to get much more challenging and unpredictable with climate change. That's where I think we can step in to help.
Well, and when we think about, the challenges around banking and financial services and helping more businesses get off the ground or become more efficient, we are crossing over into a world with 8 billion people, with challenges around climate, with challenges around health and pandemics and things of this nature. And, as we get into the next year, we have to think about there are 1.7 billion people still that are unbanked in the world. But the real story of how that has changed since, say, 2007 is that, almost 800 million people have come into the regulated, financial sector. And with new business models, we are seeing a ongoing sort of push to get people to have access into the financial system. And we talk about this a lot, we write about this a lot, and we think about this a lot, and we talk to founders that are trying to solve these things every single week. We have a podcast ourselves called One Vision, where we have these founders come on to talk about how they're changing the system. And when we look at access versus really, supporting the needs, the financial needs of consumers and businesses, we have to think about how banking has changed. And we need to think about the fact that more than 90% of, the people that we're trying to serve in financial services really don't have their finances necessarily optimized. So, when we think about the need to change and we think about, the ant groups of the world and what they've done to provide access, it's important that we think about how we get people to better leverage credit, to better improve their savings and their investments and their financial condition and be able to start businesses better. And I think this is the continued reflection that the future of banking and fintech and most industries for that matter is going to have to recognize that we are all part of a connected system. When we help the lives of our consumers, our employees, and our communities, everybody thrives. Everybody wins. And so we need to continue to support business models that shift there. And I think business models themselves are going to have to continually be reinvented. Yeah, we do a little bit of that now. We have seen the need for agility and resiliency, but now we're seeing this need for sustainability and inclusivity. And businesses themselves have realized, I think, to a certain extent, that they are very privileged to serve those that they do, the individuals and businesses that make up the constituents of who they serve. But they have to be more accountable to those communities. And we do talk a lot about that in our book, Beyond Good, that came out last year. Our efforts in this space to find more businesses that live the values that reflect these things, from Aspiration in the West to Ant Group in the East, these are going to be the businesses that last, that make an impact, and are significant enough to last for the next 100 years. So that being said, what's your thinking about where things are headed? How do you feel about 2022? How do you feel about the fact that it's another year yet again? Where did the last 2 years go?
No idea. I can't believe that it's 2022 already. Don't get me started. But before we go there, there are some scores I need to settle. Here are some buzzwords I know that our fintech community would love to get rid of. Now that we're in the new year, let's get started to think about things anew. So, for example, things like new normal, things like unprecedented. Seriously, we've been doing this for 2 years now. It's no longer new because is there even a normal? I don't know if there's even a normal anymore. Let's just get going. That's what I would say. Stop the buzzword salad. Let's build. Let's do something that means something that actually creates good, not just talking about creating good. Now, all jokes aside, here are a few things I can get behind. I would love to see more, and I think we will see more true financial inclusion, not just talking about financial inclusion, not just extending access to people, but actually focusing on needs of communities, right? We start seeing a lot of fintech startups looking at different areas, looking at different groups of people and what they need, how they live their lives. For example, LGBTQ, for example, musicians, for example, immigrants. There are many, many groups of people, and I'm going to borrow this from our friend, Billy Simons. These are not marketing groups. These are real people with real needs. We need to A, seek to understand them better, looking at what they need, and B, and work towards providing it. We can put men on the moon. We can shoot people to space. I am sure we can solve that. So that's focus on community is one trend I believe we will continue to see this year. Another interesting place is payments. Payments been all the best. We look at the funding, we look at a lot of the new offerings in the last 2 years. There's been a lot going on, especially with the focus on buy now, pay later. What I would love to see is I would love to see companies extending that business model to do more good. Don't just create a different payment means to get people into more debt. Look at how you can extend that service to help people get, for example, things that they actually need, not just things that they don't need, and help them with the cash flow, help them to be more financially secure in the future. At the end of the day, that's what all of this is about, right? If we talk a lot about fintech innovation for the past decade, 2 decades. We talk about how fintech will be different than incumbent banks. So let's act like that, be different, and do good. And last but not least, I think sustainability is a trend we will also continue to see, but I would love to see more companies giving the data, giving the transparency extend that to consumers and allow them to make the choice, allow them to choose the role that they want to play with respect to the society, right? I would love to know where I'm spending my money and how that impacts the carbon footprint of the planet. I would like to know how my day-to-day action contribute or not contribute to the climate crisis that I see. Sustainability is not just about environment. It's not just about corporates creating metrics to make themselves look good or to get themselves away from the risk of climate change. It's also about social. It's also about governance. It's also about being a good citizen of the society. So let's focus on that. What about you?
Well, when I think about the health of a community, I think about sort of that happiness index and the way that people, especially in Northern Europe and some other countries, really, dignify their communities by understanding that there's more than just productivity. It's more than just gross domestic product, which we should monitor and compare societies across, because the long-term health of humanity has less to do with, creating more widgets or having more profit or having more billionaires than it does to move us forward in terms of what it means to be human. And that connectivity to a longer term view of improving our society, improving what it means to be human, to live healthy, happy lives, I think is something that, more founders are considering. What is the long-term impact of what they're building? And how does it impact not just, the service that they're in? You could be producing, cans of tuna, or you could be a bank, or you could be what have you. If you don't think about your supply chain, if you don't think about the impact of the business that you're in, if you don't think about, how impacting or helping someone in one area affects another, or maybe disadvantages another group, then, what is the purpose? And, I go back to what we've written about in the book or what we talk about every week in the podcast. And we bring this to the AntKast listeners to challenge them for this coming year. When 2022 is looked back upon in 10 years, how did you change? How did you change in terms of your focus in work, your focus in your business, and your focus on the purpose of why you do what you do? It's not just to put food on the table. And I think that there's an awful lot that we can do to change what we do every day, the way that we think, the way that we challenge our business, our leaders, and the people around us to do better. So, given that, how are we going to move forward? What are we going to do next?
Be intentional. I think if I were to sum up our to-do list in two words for this new year, 2020, is to be intentional. To be intentional about being inclusive, to be intentional about doing good, to be intentional in everything that we do. Because at the end of the day, banking is a means, is not a destination, right? We forget about the services part of financial services. Why do we exist? What is our raison d'être? What problems are you trying to solve? And what role do you play to be part of that solution? January is a month for, to reflect upon the year past and to plan for the new future. We have people who, plan to exercise to be healthy. We have people who look at their finances to figure out if they are on track, on target for what they want to do with their milestones in life. Perhaps this is also a time for us to take stock. What kind of citizen do you want to be in this planet Earth? We have one Earth. We have one planet. We don't really have a plan B, despite all of the fascination about traveling to Mars and sooner or later settling in the outer space. We have a responsibility to this planet. We have a responsibility to our community, to the next generation and generations thereafter. So let's be intentional and let 2022 be the year where we are more intentional to doing good, to purpose. And for that, thank you so much, the Ant Group, for having us on the AntKast podcast. And for our listeners, it's been wonderful chatting with you all, and hope you enjoyed the show. And that's it for this edition of the AntKast. AntKast is a podcast that brings you deep into conversations with global thinkers, innovators, and entrepreneurs on groundbreaking technology and how they are shaping our lives for better or for worse. Please subscribe so you don't miss a single episode wherever you get your podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and talk to you again soon.